Well, hello everyone. My name is Nicholas Lanham, and today we're going to be talking about offshore wind energy. So before we really jump into the discussion of offshore wind energy, I thought it'd be important to talk about where exactly our energy, specifically electricity, comes from here in the US. So as you can see by this diagram, the majority of our electricity is produced using natural gas, and that equates to about 35% of total production. And the next 25% is produced using coal. We have 20% by nuclear power, 1% of petroleum, which is really not very important, and 17% is produced using renewable energy sources. Of the renewable energy sources, 7.3 is wind, and then followed by hydroelectric power, which is 6.6. So functionally, 7.3% of all electricity generated in the US is generated through wind energy. So now we get to look at this diagram, and this diagram talks about the growth of renewable energy sources from 1950 to 2019. So as you can see, starting in 1950, there was a slow growth of hydroelectric power, and as of now, it is pretty well steadied out, and there's not really a growth of hydroelectric power. But if you look at the beginning of in the 2000s, we've seen a massive growth in wind energy, and wind energy is now the largest sector of renewable energy produced here in the United States. Another interesting side note, it's not super related to my topic, but important to know, is beginning in 2010, you can see the really steady increase of solar energy as a source of energy. So what exactly is offshore wind energy? Because this is an oceanography course, so it's important to talk about the ocean, not just energy. But offshore wind energy is the use of wind turbines located in the ocean to produce electricity to power homes, businesses, and automobiles. It's actually really to power anything that requires electricity. This is a renewable type of energy because the wind is constantly blowing. What this means is we can't deplete the wind, and so it's constant, and so it becomes renewable. So these are some different types of wind turbines. As you can see, the one on the far left is land-based, and so this is like the kind you see when you go through Iowa. Or there's also one, I believe, in Anoka. The next kind is a shallow water, and there's, as you can see, it's more of a proven technology. There's more of these in existence today. And then we have transitional water and deep water. The interesting side note with the deep water is actually a floating platform that's anchored to the seafloor. It's not like the shallow or transitional where it's the wind turbine itself is anchored and bolted or concrete to the floor. It's actually a floating platform that has anchors attached to the floor. So I wanted to also study, as far as offshore wind power, where does the US rank on a national scale? And looking at this diagram, we can see that United States comes in 12th place, producing 30 megawatts per year. That's following a lot of other countries, and the top one is the United Kingdom, which produces 7,963 megawatts in the year 2018. For the United States, is 30 megawatts. That can power about 1,700 homes. And so as far as the United States, where do we have winds? Where are the high wind speeds? And so looking at this diagram, we can see that on the west coast by California and Oregon, there's a hot spot of really high wind speeds right there, and even up towards Washington. And then on the east coast by Maryland, Maine, Connecticut, this whole area has high wind speeds. So if we were looking to place an offshore wind turbine or an energy farm, we would probably want to pick one of the locations that has good wind speeds and good potential. So what causes the wind in the ocean? Well, the wind in the ocean is caused by air moving from high pressure regions to low pressure regions. So what happens effectively is in high pressure regions, the wind moves towards the low pressure regions, and low pressure region, it rises and moves towards the high pressure regions. This creates an effective cell. These cells can be called Hadley cells if they're located right here in the two middle latitudes, and then or low latitudes, I guess, and then mid latitude cells, and then polar cells, right? But it's not just that perfect where the air moves from one pole to the next. Because of the Coriolis effect, the wind essentially bends, and these bending winds converge into creating larger winds called like the northeastern trade winds, southeasterly trade winds, westerlies. Actually, it should be northeasterly trade winds, but you get the idea. And so how this relates to wind turbines is we want to place our wind turbines in the areas where the winds are. So it would be best between high and low pressure zones, and definitely not in this zone right here, like the intertropical convergence zone or the doldrums, because there's a lack of wind there. So why would we use offshore wind energy and just not regular wind energy? One of the main reasons is land space. Offshore wind energy essentially saves and conserves land. It allows us to place a turbine in an area that can't be used for agricultural or living. And so in an area like China, this might be important because they have a high population and would need to use essentially every ounce of their land. And even in the US, we can use every ounce of our land more effectively. Another one is wind speeds in the open ocean are stronger than land, which can produce more electricity. It produces more electricity. I imagine some of this may have to do with the trees not blocking the wind. It could also have to do with the ocean being larger than land. Also, the wind is steadier in the open ocean. And the last one is an interesting one to me. One of the reasons wind is nice is because coastal areas are growing as far as population. And so it moves the source of energy closer to the people that are actually consuming the energy, which in essence means that there's less energy to transmit over long distances, which can actually lose energy. So what happens if the wind stops or comes to a halt? Well, this is a good question, and it's one of the hardest parts of wind energy, because if the wind stops, the turbine stops producing energy. And when we don't produce energy, the lights go out, which is not what anybody in the 20th century wants to experience. So developers have come up with an idea where a deep wind turbine will float on top of a large concrete basin. And in areas where the wind turbine is producing more energy than is required, it will subsequently pump water from the ocean into this basin. And then in areas when the wind turbine can't keep up, maybe the wind slows down or something, the water inside this basin will get run out across a small turbine, which will generate electricity. And how this could work is say, and these wind turbines are near a large city. What would happen is during the day, when energy is needed, or during the night when energy is needed less, the wind turbine would pump the tank full of water. And then during the day when energy is needed more and the wind turbine can't keep up, some of that water will run out over a turbine, a small turbine inside the tank, which will produce extra electricity. This is an example of a shallow wind turbine base. It's not the kind that would hold water in them. It's just a base to mount it to the seafloor. So another main problem with wind turbines is wind turbine disposal. According to the Bloomberg article that I read, 85% of a wind turbine can be recycled. So that's good news. Because wind turbines are a machine, they only can last so long before they have to be taken down or replaced. Pieces have to be replaced. But the problem really becomes with the blades. The blades are made of a fiberglass material that's incredibly strong and durable, which would need to be to withstand incredibly strong winds and not break and kill people. The problem is this material currently cannot be recycled. So currently, people are dumping these wind turbine pieces. They have to cut them into pieces, truck them to landfills, and that's where they end up. And so the real question becomes, are landfills a viable solution to the disposal of turbine blades? And in my opinion, no, because, it really defeats the purpose of producing renewable and green energy if we have to dump the pieces left over from energy production into landfills where they will never decompose. They will be there forever because of this fiberglass is so durable. There are people, luckily, working to create options and solutions where this fiberglass can potentially be recycled. And so because this is an oceanography course, I want to discuss some of the effects that offshore wind farms could have on ocean ecosystems. So one of the effects people are concerned about is how it will affect wildlife like birds. Because, these are essentially big blades running through the sky, and if they hit birds, they could potentially kill them. They also could be a deterrent and cause birds to change their migration routes and move to different areas. This could ultimately affect the ocean ecosystem because birds are a part of the ocean ecosystem. They eat fish and interact with the system. Other things that could be affected are, as the pylons are drilled into the ground, this could essentially cause vibrations in the water that could disturb fish. Also, ocean ecosystem area is taken up by these large bases sitting in the ground or on the ocean floor. Another one is, as the wind turbines turn, they make sound, and this sound could affect both birds in the air and fish and creatures underground or under the water. Another thing that I personally think could be a problem with the idea of having large concrete basins that would collect water is you have to imagine that small photoplankton and zooplankton, and possibly even small oceanic creatures could get sucked into these large basins and subsequently would die. The plankton couldn't collect light anymore and would die, which would end the ecosystem within that basin. This would cause essentially water to be or organisms to be destroyed. But one thing that wind power will do that will help the ocean is it will help to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere. The way it will do this is, because we could produce energy with wind, we would not have to use as much energy that was produced by gas or coal, which releases CO2 or carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. What the real advantage with this is, as you can see in this diagram, by the year 2100, they say if we continue as usual, the risk of impact for the ocean is very high or high. But if we lower our CO2 emissions, it was going to move the impact to moderate or undetectable. This is going to help ocean ecosystems. And so using solar power is a way to reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere. And instead of dumping that CO2 into a place where it will get absorbed by the ocean and turn to acid, we can instead use the ocean and its winds as a viable way to create energy as an alternate format. So I hope you learned a few things about oceans and their ecosystems, and also wind and energy production. And thanks so much for watching.